Olá, boa tarde a todos. Voltamos para o segundo bloco de hoje. Manda o link dessa transmissão para os seus amigos, que essa próxima sessão é um assunto universal para qualquer gestor, que é a criação da política de frotas, né? Nem todas as empresas usam esse termo, alguns já incluem os termos de uso dos carros no próprio contrato de trabalho, mas o importante mesmo é ter esse respaldo legal. Quem traz o próximo painel é o Steve Saltgiver, o diretor de inovação estratégica e gestão de produtos na RTA Gestão de Frotas, e nós vamos conferir juntos as dicas que ele traz para compor esse documento fundamental para qualquer empresa, cobrindo aí diversas áreas da gestão, como manutenção, relacionamento com o condutor, parametrização de treinamentos, né? Enfim. Se você enfrenta algum gargalo nesse quesito, eu tenho certeza que esse próximo conteúdo vai te ajudar. Fique agora com a próxima palestra.
Let's start out with my bio. Some of you know me, some may not. I'm a longtime veteran with 40 years or more experience. Probably the thing I would focus on the most in my bio is I've been able to successfully turn around 5 mediocre fleet operations into winning organizations throughout my career. And I'm excited today to really talk about this topic because it's something that's near and dear to my heart as I've gone into some pretty poor operations and be able to turn those around. And it always starts with a strategy framework. The strategy framework that I'm going to talk about today, it has basically 4 pillars. You can distill it down to 4 basic pillars. And those 4 pillars, and this is applicable to all fleet operations pretty uniformly: stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management. I did want to put together kind of a quick disclaimer. Designing this fleet success strategic framework is very complex. It's detailed and comprehensive. And this training is just to focus on high level today. I would have took way too many slides if I were to get really granular and detailed. So keep that in mind as we're going through this process. But let's start out with stakeholder satisfaction. What are the key elements of stakeholder satisfaction? Most of you should have a stakeholder advisory board or committee in place to kind of provide oversight to you as a fleet, to provide input, to help you make decisions, to help uniformly guide the processes for each of the fleet user departments. There should be some type of a 5-star or rating process for your techs, your vendors, people that are stakeholders inside your organization, where they can really take a quick look and rate the progress, the customer service that you're doing. She should have a mechanism in place where customers and vendor satisfaction is surveyed periodically. We use, for example, in our operation, an NPS score, a Net Promoter Score, which is really helpful. Anything over 50 would be a good score in that category. A lot of big corporations use the Net Promoter Score, and I find it's pretty universal to all types of organizations. You should have service level agreement focused in your operation, have your customers on, your user departments, your vendors on service level agreements, and really articulate those things that you want to focus on together as a partnership with your customers and your vendors. You should have a billing chargeback system to drive efficiencies and awareness and fleet costs. And then you should have routine cadences like quarterly business reviews to speak directly with your stakeholders or using departments and share information with them that's pertinent to the fleet operation so that they understand that they are not just a user, but they're a contributor to the success of the fleet. Have formal processes in place to negotiate contracts and leverage expenses. When you're a fleet, you get the opportunity to work with a lot of vendors to do specific things like body work, glass. don't just accept their retail rates. Go in and negotiate some, at least get their jobber rates or even a better leverage rate. Those kind of things help not only you and the fleet to keep costs low, but they keep costs low for your stakeholders that you're charging rates to. And then finally, you should have some type of a regular cross-functional cadence or a huddle in place with vehicle users, with mechanics, with various stakeholders on a periodic basis. For example, you might want to have a shift huddle for each one of your mechanics as they come on shift. Get the mechanics together, have a little quick safety topic, or talk about the things that are important that day as you're going through the process. Successful maintenance repair programs and strategies really require driver involvement. I see a lot of people err on the side, they don't really get the drivers involved, but you got to remember that they're critical to your success. Drivers are basically the eyes and ears of the fleet operation. The driver satisfaction is obviously paramount. One bad driver can really drive your organization into the ground. So make sure you take care of them. What they want is to perform their mission as quick as possible without having a breakdown or any kind of problem with their vehicle. Daily driver vehicle operation feedback is essential. Sometimes it's actually required by law for those of you that are required to comply with the CDL and FMCSA guidelines. But I always recommend that everyone fills out a daily vehicle inspection report, even if you're not required. I think it's just a good best practice. The more things you can catch proactively, the better your fleet operation is going to be, and the better it is to reduce costs. Drivers can perform key daily tasks like the DVIR, like checking oil, like checking air pressure in tires, checking for body damage, things like that really help you as a fleet manager to take care of those things before they actually get out on the road. And these tasks actually can reduce door traffic or downtime in your fleet. So be aware that the driver is one of your most important stakeholders. Chargeback System really improves engagement and accountability. Over on the left side of the screen, you'll see a couple of beat up pieces of equipment. If the customer doesn't care about the equipment and they don't see the results of the costs and the damage that you're having to fix, then they don't really care about the equipment. But if you have a good chargeback system in place and you keep a quarterly business review with them and you really share some of this behavior with them, that gets them more involved as a stakeholder to really take care of the equipment. It's always important on the back end to take care of the equipment because that's when you sell it, that's how you complete the total cost of ownership and get the best cost of ownership possible. Also, if you have a recognition program, you also are able to impact the user's operating behavior. Users are motivated to reduce operator misuse and abuse if they're aware of it, and it helps drive user accountability and care. It also increases involvement in the maintenance repair process when drivers and stakeholders are more involved in it. Let's talk about the second key pillar, intentional culture. Intentional culture is a lot of things, but essentially many of you probably worked at an organization where the culture dragged you down or didn't motivate you or you wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I know I have, and there's organizations like that, and a lot of them didn't pay attention to intentional culture. And that's exactly what it means. You have things in place intentionally to help the employees belong to the culture, adhere to the cultural norms and core values. So these are the elements of a intentional culture. Employee one-on-one cadence. Every supervisor should have a one-on-one on a weekly, bi-weekly, or even monthly basis with their employees so that they can spend some quality time with them and not just about work. Learn about their families, learn about what drives them, learn about their hobbies, learn about what their long-term plans are, where they see their career going. Really get to know those employees. The more you get to know those employees, the more you're able to provide guidance and get to know them, and then the more they're engaged in the company. Employee training should be paramount in your operation, and each one of your employees deserves to have a career development plan in place. So make sure those things are happening with your one-on-ones as you go through with your employees. Ask those questions. Do they need to be mentored? Do they want to do something different? I remember a situation years ago where I was having one-on-ones with a particular individual, and I came right out and asked them flat out, do you enjoy working here? And it was surprising their answer. They said, Steve, no, I hate working here. So the first question was, well, why do you hate working here? What can we do to make you happier? How can we find you a place to be more successful? You as a manager, supervisor, you owe that to your employees. I've always said that there are not bad employees, just bad leaders. So those are the kind of things that you really need to think about as you go through that to help people be successful. In the case I just iterated, to make them successful, I helped them rewrite their resume. They had an accounting degree. We got them out of fleet, got them to work in a sister agency, and they were really happy with the outcome. You should have quality control assessment processes in place to promote employee work excellence. A lot of people would call those QCIs, quality control inspections. Make sure that your people, you have the opportunity to inspect their work to make sure it's up to par. Technicians and fleet employee assessments are great tools, and you should test your employees, particularly your mechanics and those that do perfunctory tasks, to make sure you know where they are in their skill set. That helps you align what training needs they might need to have. If they're in the fleet, for example, and the assessment tool shows that they're really weak in the electronic area, then you know what kind of training to give them and help them boost their portfolio. You should have at least an annual engagement measurement process to gauge morale, see how people are engaged in the company. And it gives you some feedback, and you can create an action plan for that. There should be a training focus for all employees. I recommend LinkedIn Learning. I think it's a great tool for the admin type side of the business. You probably should have some for your mechanics and your technicians. You probably should have some kind of training focus using the OEMs. And there's some other specific training to technicians. Also, be a certification and academic education reimbursement focused operation. For example, send people through the CAFS, ASC certifications for mechanics. Really be focused on continuous learning, continuous education. And one of the new things that's really coming about is people are hiring people to become dream manager counselors. That's a great program. If you haven't read about that, it takes this intentional culture to that next level. It allows you to sit down and just ask employees what their dreams are outside of work. And the more you get aligned with the employee and the more you know about them, the more you can work uniformly together. Of course, effective strategy frameworks, they start with alignment to your organizational core values. Most of you probably have a vision, mission, and goals. If you don't, that's something you really should be focused on. Employee or people first focused is a good way to start. You're only as good as the people on your operational team. I always remember coaching Little League years ago. I know this is not a good fleet story, but we were only as good as the worst person on our team. And so we rallied around to improve the skills of that worst person. Took several championships because we really cared and got emotionally involved in that. The organization that you're with should have high emotional intelligence. In other words, they should care about each one of the employees. They don't offend people. They don't say things that are out of bounds. If they have criticism, they do it with care and candor. And they don't hold back. Your organization should have a safety focus. Your employees should know that they're responsible and accountable, and they have ownership on their process. A good situation I remember in my career, we had to shut down a program. My boss wanted to know why the heck we shut that down. Well, I had to step up and take ownership and say the program wasn't working. He was a little bit put back. He was surprised that someone would actually do that because it was such a high level important operation. But I told him the reasons why we did that, and he figured that was a good operation. We finally got it back on par and got it back working again. So take accountability. Your organization should be ethical, honest, and don't underestimate the value of trust. Employees work in an environment when they work harder when they trust their coworkers. That gets a little challenging sometimes, especially if you're in a remote environment. So you have to work even harder. And then finally, everyone in your operations should have a good customer service operation. Over there to the right, you can see how all those core values, mission, and vision intersect. In our operation, these are our core values: humble, hungry, and smart. And we use that to gauge our employees as we're going through that process. Keep in mind that employee focus is a full-time activity from hiring to termination. So I recommend that people have structured interview guides. Make sure when you're interviewing employees, for example, that each employee that you're going to be hiring or interviewing gets the same questions. You don't have an ad hoc process where you're asking one applicant a question that you're not asking each other. Have a way to consolidate that information, have a way to make it concise and be able to compare those answers, and then have a team that helps you in that hiring process so that you can agree and get together. Team hiring assessment, sit down with all your interviewers, and really get a consensus. How was this person compared to that person? Who fits the needs? Who's the most qualified, and so forth? And make sure you have it consistent, because the most important thing that you can do as a manager is make sure you hire someone that subscribes to your values, your core values, and your culture. You'll find out very quickly if you hire the wrong person. Make sure your operation has a commitment to training. Make sure you have individual development, mentor plans in place, particularly have a mentor to nurture your new employees, to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. Make sure you have personal performance objectives, PPOs they're called, and they're aligned with your organizational goals. And so everybody knows they're rowing in the same direction. You should have formal employee evaluation processes where that's on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis, and then they all lead up to an annual basis. The more frequent those are, the more you sit down in your one-on-ones and talk to those people, the better it is, so that they're not slammed at the end of that process. And then finally, top quality performing organizations have a talent review and ranking process. And what they use that for is to decide who their next supervisors are going to be, who their emerging talent is going to be as they go through that process. So you always have a bench in place should someone quit, someone move from the operation. And then finally, employee feedback surveys, engagement ratings are critical to your operation. So make sure you have those in place. Make sure you're always getting a pulse from the employees. Good intentional cultures also have clear policies and procedures in place, and SOPs and desktop work instructions. That's especially important now as people are starting to retire and they move around, and we're having some turnover because of a new generation is coming in and an older generation is going out. A lot of people have been caught off guard because they don't have their policies, procedures, and work instructions documented. So they're really scrambling to make sure that happens. So make sure your policies are regulatory compliant. Make sure your policies set employee standards. Employees are particularly trained to policies and procedure standards. Make sure you have training classes. Make sure you have quizzes. Make sure people really know what those policies and procedures are. They have access to them. Make sure your policies are dynamic and flexible. If the environment changes or laws change, you need to be able to quickly pivot, update your policies and procedures. Policies always should be acknowledged by all your employees. They should acknowledge that they've read those policies, are familiar with those policies. So if they violate policies, they're not blindsided by management before they're terminated or before they're disciplined in any manner. And then always refresh your policies and procedures and your operating instructions. That should be done at a minimum every 2 years. Detailed work instructions drive standardization, reduce costs, and mitigate liability. For example, if you look to the right there, you'll see what it takes to do a safety inspection. That's an SOP. to preventive maintenance work instructions on kingpin inspection process. You should have all that documented in some way, shape, or form so that your new mechanics, your new employees, whatever that task may be, they have access to find that information. Some of you may have it available on computer programs from third parties. That's acceptable as well. So it also it helps enforce standards and establish a step-by-step task instruction so people aren't left out there in an ad hoc fashion trying to figure things out. It helps facilitate technician training, enforces quality and safety, and enables technician performance and accountability, and most importantly, it can mitigate potential liability. If you've ever been sued, like I have, or named in a lawsuit because someone got in an accident, it's very disturbing. So you want to make sure that you cover all your bases. So good programs are highly dependent on durable and documented processes. So make sure that happens. Make sure you have a book or you have a virtual file where these things can be found. A lot of people use SharePoint now. A lot of people can use Teams, put those files in Teams. But make sure whatever that is, could be a learning management portal that your operation operates. And commit to ongoing technician training. Classroom, practical training should be a combination of both. The more trained a person is, the more their commitment is to the organization. Each technician, each employee should have probably a minimum of 2% training, which is equivalent of about 40 hours a year. That also gets them out of the workplace, gives them an opportunity to expand their knowledge, and gives them a little bit of loyalty. Also, make sure you have team accountability in your culture for the work performed. If you haven't done a RACI recently, I suggest everybody do a RACI. And then if you haven't had a chance to rate yourself or analyze yourself with a maturity index rating, then I would recommend you do that as well. Those two tools are very valuable on making sure the culture is working together in unison. And this is just an example to the right on what you should do to your PM technician standards. Regarding maturity index ratings, these are two that I've used in my past previous jobs. This one on the left goes from reactive to best in class. You don't want to be that fleet who runs around with their hair on fire. You want to be that best in class that's scheduled, preemptive, predictive, has a good organization in place. The same thing on the other side is pretty much similar, but you want to be an organization that's highly predictive and proactive. A RACI process is just simply an inventory of responsible, accountable consultant forms. So you really take a task, like for example, on the left side, you'll see a task there that says asset bid assistance and OEM negotiation. Well, the person responsible for that task would be the fleet manager. They'd also be accountable. They may consult with human resources in case there's any ergonomic things that need to happen. They may also be consult with finance for the money. And certainly you want to have your drivers involved in that process to at least inform them or even bring them in to consult. So depending on that task, try to put together a little matrix like that with your stakeholders to help them drive those kinds of processes. Quality control and accountability matters. You need to be able to inspect what you expect. So whatever level of expectation you have as a supervisor, make sure that's connected with those that work for you. Quality control inspections should happen periodically. I suggest a couple a week for technicians. Everything from brake jobs to preventive maintenance. Probably more importantly, preventive maintenance more than anything. Hold your suppliers accountable for their quality. That's something a lot of people don't do. Go to their shop periodically and sit down with them if you've had problems and go over the service level agreement and make sure you get things in writing, with action items and action plans. When you conduct these random QCI inspections, make sure you use that time to coach and correct and train your technicians. Conduct periodic and annual evaluations of your technician skills and then certainly reward and recognize superior performance. And the flip side of that is make sure you address those issues that could be a disadvantage to your operation if they're not working well, or those that are slackers in your operation. This is just a quick slide I put together on how you can actually use the QCA process to promote continuous improvement. Like, for example, on a preventive maintenance inspection, over there to the right is the inspection list. I always used to just select 5 just random things, and I would go through them and I would say, did they catch it? Was it done? If they caught all 5, then they had 100%. If they caught only 5 out of 10 out of 5 items, then they had, if they caught 4 out of 5, then they were 90%. And then keep that on file and keep that, so you're always trying to strive to get people up to that 100% level. Workflow standardization should always be your focus. You should have a visual flow. Over there to the right, you'll see a flow chart. You should be mapping out all your processes, making sure you remove any wasted, non-value added steps. For those of you that recognize these are swim lanes and then flow charts. And the one there in the middle is a what we call a spaghetti diagram. So if you've got a preventive maintenance inspection and you're looking at where you can maybe optimize that inspection, your best bet is to eliminate the steps that are involved in doing that inspection. This also reduces people, process, and technology waste. So Six Sigma that can be valuable to you in your operation. It always promotes continuous improvement, and it also prevents obsolete processes as things change, as technology changes. One thing I always stress, I've been into a lot of shops during my consulting career, and there's a lot of shops that could really use the 5S process, which is sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. That comes from the Japanese in the automotive manufacturing industry, and it really plays well here in fleet management. You should always have that as a strategy. You don't want to be those 2 pictures on the top. You want to be the clean, organized pictures there on the bottom. The more organized and the more clean, the better safety is in that operation, the more productivity you can get out of your employees. All employees should have SMART goals and action plans. SMART simply is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound goals. For example, if you look at the 2 graphics on the side there, just to simply say something like review road calls or reduce road calls is not a very SMART goal, because it doesn't really depict it. It doesn't really cause any change or any action. Rather than do that, down there in the green, reduce road calls from 10 to 7 by March 15th. That's the kind of goals that you want to put in all your action plans, your strategies as you go forward, so that you're striving to meet an outcome by a certain date. Individuals, I like this quote, individuals on high-performance teams do not tolerate mediocrity. They hold themselves and each other accountable for the results of the activities. That's what you're trying to accomplish when you have an intentional culture. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about resource efficiency. Resource efficiency, you should always have goals and metric-driven organization for accountability. You should value timely asset replacement. That's critical for reducing costs. You should have routine processes to assess the optimal replacement cycles of your assets. You should always be focused on utilization, right sizing, right typing, and right fueling your assets. As we discussed in the previous section, the use of Six Sigma and lean management tools should be a priority to optimize your operation, to lower those costs. 5S, DMAIC, workflow standards, understanding the 8 wastes would be another critical one. You should strive to have role-level customized dashboards. For example, a fleet manager, fleet director, vice president of fleet, they may want to see some high-level metrics, but a fleet manager may want to see, or a fleet supervisor may want to see metrics that apply specifically to them. How many work orders are open, how many road calls they have, what the employee productivity is. So make sure you have role-level customized dashboards or widgets that really pertain to the work they're accountable to. And technicians, you might want to have another level of a dashboard for them, which might be their performance on standard repair times, on direct and indirect labor, percentages, things of that nature. Operational maturity index evaluation process that I talked about is key in this part of the operation. Parts management, inventory assessment. Make sure you have processes in place to do routine inventories. Make sure you have a way to evaluate parts in the inventory and make sure you get rid of parts that are used or have gone obsolete. Make sure you have processes in place to really cull the parts room whenever you can to eliminate some of that waste. You should have predictive analytic tools and interfaces in place, like telematics. Hopefully you're using that to monitor utilization, driver behavior, those kinds of things that are pertinent to the fleet operation. Or you have partners in place that use the third-party software to help you do predictive analytics. Make sure you have SRTs in place, diagnostic tools. Some of the more popular ones are Noragon, of course, Motor and Chilton have the SRTs, and there's some other ones out there. And then make sure you actively manage your safety recalls and warranty management processes to help you not expend unnecessary dollars on things you should have had taken care of with a warranty or recall. I always tell people on resource efficiency, these 4 buckets are the ones that are the most important to you. Depreciation, people, fuel, and M&R expenses. And that order typically is where all your money is. Your organization should have a focus on preventive maintenance practices. The organization, if you're clearly focused on PM, you'll be able to drive a lot of the unnecessary costs out of your organization, unnecessary breakdowns, unnecessary downtime. And you should base that PM practice on OEM recommended intervals and requirements. You should meet customer convenience. So if your customers are working 8 to 5, chances are that's probably not the best time for you to do preventive maintenance when all the vehicles are out on the road. So you may want to adjust your schedule to a later shift or a weekend focus to be able to take those vehicles down so you're not inconveniencing the customers. Make sure customers receive advance notice of PM scheduled so they don't have to hinder their mission as they're trying to perform at their services. Ensure safety practices are always in place. Make sure you have a lockout, tagout, for example. Make sure you have lifts that are certified, those kinds of things to make sure you're running a safe operation. Have a dedicated parts bay for PMs so you can minimize steps and lost time. Make sure you use a checklist, whether that's electronic or it's a paper form that has symbols that can be easily interpreted by others. And then make sure you have a sequential flow for greater productivity and minimize errors. As an example, this is kind of a rudimentary drawing of a PM work bay, making sure they can have like these convex mirrors here at the end that you can see. Helps somebody check the brake lights by themselves. You don't have to tie up 2 people. Puts the parts within hand's reach, which makes it easier for them to do that. So put those things like filters and fluids and things by your PM bay. Make sure your PM program incorporates multiple echelons of progressive tasks, A, B, C, D inspections. Reports are missed and overdue PMs go to users so that they know that that's important. Work orders are used to record PM and follow-up maintenance activities. PM inspection is separated from defects, discovered on the follow-on repairs for greater benchmarking. Make sure you have a process in place to separate the PM inspection from the follow-on repairs so you can get a good cadence on how long it takes to do a PM inspection itself. Don't combine those together because you'll be having inspections that go from 2 hours to 9 hours, and you can't ever do anything to standardize that time. Use your DVIRs, use your history, use recalls, use that roadside inspection, DOT information if you can, or if you get it. And then campaign data. This is all critical information that can be used to bolster your PM program. Procedures that should identify vehicles scheduled for replacement and check for overdue PMs and check for warranties. In other words, you should have processes in place that you don't over maintain a vehicle that you're getting ready to replace in the next month or so. Okay, managing depreciation expenses. I always like to talk about the basic truths about fleet replacement. A fleet of properly replaced vehicles is cheaper than one of improperly replaced vehicles. And also, if you can afford to operate an old fleet, you can afford to operate a less old fleet. Avoiding spending money on fleet replacement does not save the organization money or help it better fulfill its mission, except perhaps in the short term. Over the long term, poor fleet replacement practices take money away from the mission. So keep that in mind. Make sure you have the right analysis in place and your strategy to work with your superiors and make sure they know the importance of timely replacement of assets. Managing people expenses. The best thing you can do to manage people, other than the intentional culture that we talked about, is maximize their productivity. Make sure your mechanics, your technicians know what their direct and indirect labor times are. Make sure they're focused on their percent of standard times. In other words, if the standard time is 2 hours and they hit at 2 hours, they're 100% effective. If they're over by 10 minutes, it might be 90%. So make sure you do that to monitor their employee productivity time. Perform staffing analysis occasionally, like VEU analysis to size your shop, size your number of mechanics. This is also a good way to assess how many mechanics you need and show the information to your boss if you're struggling to get enough technicians. Also, make sure you deploy correct skill levels at the type of job. You should have advanced people doing your preventive maintenance. A lot of people, for example, put their least skilled people there, and the least skilled find the least things that will often be broken down. So I know that seems backwards to some people, but usually I've found that that's one of the best things you can do strategically. Make sure you have an in-house shop repair scheduling tool, some type of planning process, so you're organized up front. You know how to move from one job to the next. And then I recommend that you use some type of a SRT tool, like you see here at the bottom. That always helps keep things moving smoothly. Managing fuel expenses can save, it's usually about 10 to 20% of your total operating budget. So focus on reducing miles traveled, engine idle time. In a situation with one of my fleets, we were able to manage our engine idle time from 42% down to 8%, which saved $2.5 million a year. Now, of course, that's predicated on the size of the fleet, but there's substantial savings. 1 gallon per hour can be attributed to unnecessary idling. So that's something to think about as you're going forward with that process. Establish routine metrics to measure and benchmark performance. Create, utilize, and review fuel transaction exception reports. Utilize telematics to capture location usage data and measure asset utilization. Establish a sustainability program and deploy alternative fuels where they may work, but make sure you do it on a return on investment model and not just a feel-good methodology, because ultimately the bottom line still counts. Good strategies can produce a fuel cost savings of 5% or more in most every fleet. Managing key M&R expenses. Focus on the top 3 to 5 buckets of transactions to analyze and optimize. Usually those buckets are PM costs, electronics, tires, and brakes. So keep that in mind. You should be, if you're a preventive maintenance focused fleet versus reactive, 60 to 70, 80% of your work in that shop should be preventive maintenance. Your goal is to minimize unplanned breakdowns and downtime. Establish performance metrics and measure for continuous improvement. Make sure you're a proactive focus. One of the best strategies you can do. Keep in mind that minor problems not found can lead to a cascading and very expensive vehicle failures. Major strategies emerging using AI clues or AI data with the vehicle data to prevent breakdowns is becoming real popular now. There's a lot of third parties that are doing that, and they're having some very good results. Data scientists are using algorithms to predict failures by days, weeks, and months in advance. And for example, batteries make up about 40 to 60% of the downtime failures they found. There's a company called Uptake that was able to predict the DPF filters failure 7 days in advance. Many of you have gone to a lot of that SCR technology. You know what we're talking about with DPF filters issues. It became such a problem that a lot of fleets had down vehicles. Predict your PM component intervals dynamically. In other words, use telematics or use repair intervals to schedule intervals to change out parts proactively. For example, when I was in transit years ago, we knew that the air cylinders of the door would wear out at a certain interval, and we would make sure we changed them so that they weren't a problem. You can do that with brake shoes. Certainly you can do that with tires. You can do that with a lot of other things. It's between 4 and 10 times more expensive if an asset breaks down in service versus if you catch it and take it down proactively. So keep that in mind. Focus on warranty and recall management that reduces costs and increases reliability. Warranty claims can amount to 8 to 10% of your original acquisition cost. OEMs budget that kind of money in, as particularly in the last few years, we've had record recalls. And so that money is sitting out there ready for you to claim and take care of some of those costs. Don't expend your budget on that. And also, there's a lot of things going on now where they have Carfax reports, and if you go out and you sell those vehicles on the back end, they may ask you for the history of that vehicle or the Carfax information. And if you haven't got some of these warranty or recalls done, that information is in those Carfax reports, and it may hinder your selling or at least leveraging the residual value of that vehicle. Vehicle complexity is impacting cost and reliability more than ever, so that's something that'd be more critical on getting your warranty and recall. Centralized warranty teams can help pay for themselves. We use the centralized warranty team of one of the corporate entities that I help manage, and we just turned our work orders over to them, and they went out and made the claims, and they kept about 10%, I think, of the return, but it was far worth it for us, and it's also the right thing to do. You don't want to pass on a vehicle that's unsafe to the secondary owner. Also, one of the most important tools in your quiver for a fleet management success is to have a fleet management information system. Make sure you have good, accurate data. I've seen so many people have garbage in, which equals garbage out. So make sure you have standards in place. The best way to do that is to have VRMS coding, 3C coding, basically complaint cost correction, and make sure you have the document repairs and service activities as you're going through that. Create customer billing and cost allocation, so you're charging back your repairs. Your shop replacement should be scheduled. Staff planning should be a focus. Capture trends and benchmarks for continuous improvement. And this data also allows you to measure what you can manage. If you don't have the data, you can't understand where you're at. Successful fleet management organizations keep score to win. So make sure you have scoreboards, you got visual markers in your shop. A lot of people are putting those on flat screens now. Some just put them on whiteboards, but make sure things are visible, whatever you're trying to drive in your shop, whatever is important to you. And finally, let's switch to risk management, the final pillar. Risk management policies and procedures exist and are updated. That should be a critical element that you have all the time. Work with, as a partner with your risk management people to make sure they're updated, your safety people. Employee risk management roles are defined. Who in fleet interfaces with risk management? Who does risk management talk to? What are those roles? That's a good opportunity to use the RACI that we talked about to really talk to who's in charge of what when it comes to the risk management of your company or organization. You should have a accident review process in place, should be based on National Safety Council standards. Your goal there is to rate whether the accidents are preventable or non-preventable. There should be a remediation process for preventable accidents. Maybe that ties into discipline, 3 strikes and you're out, whatever that process is. your whole strategy here is to mitigate risk as a fleet manager and a risk management partnership. Make sure you have appropriate asset level replacement processes. I mentioned that earlier. If you have older, unsafe, obsolete assets out there, you could be causing unknowingly a risk management problem. For example, I mean, if you've got a 1953 dump truck in your fleet, chances are it probably doesn't even have seat belts. That could be a high lawsuit or high-level lawsuit waiting to happen if somebody gets in an accident. So make sure you frequently update to the most current technology to keep your vehicles in compliance and safe for the operators. Make sure you have a crash management program in place. Manage your statistics and metrics. How many accidents do you have per million miles? You know, what's your average crash rate? Over there to the right, you'll see the average crash rate from the CAFM module is 20%. In 2015, an estimated 14,000 lives were saved due to seat belts. And I can certainly tell you that that is absolutely true. It was a previous life. I was a city fleet manager and a fireman, and I never unbuckled a dead person. So thankfully, in my 5 years as a fireman, that holds true. Make sure your vehicles have the appropriate insurance, and make sure you perform risk assessments in your shop periodically. Invite OSHA in, they'll help you do an assessment. Safety management program, you should have driver rewards, visual management, safety huddles. They all should be in place to really promote a safe operation. Employee training and certification programs should also be foremost in your operation. You should have partnerships in place with HR, risk, and safety as you work together as a unified group. Have periodic quarterly meetings, talk about some of the industrial accidents, crashes, unsafe situations going on in your operation, and come up with some strategies to arrest those situations and eliminate them. You should have programs in place to comply with FMCSA if you're a corporate fleet, heavy-duty fleet, and you are required to do CDLs, hours of service, electronic log devices, and DVIRs, and certainly medical card monitoring. Those DVIRs, CDL and medical card monitoring are two things that can be picked up on a roadside inspection. It's just unnecessary for that to happen, so make sure you monitor those closely. Nowadays, we have driver behavior mechanisms to ensure safe operation. Telematics are useful in creating scorecards for drivers, especially down here on this last bullet, distracted driving and driver behavior. There's scorecards where you can have points for speeding, fast starts, hard braking, things like that. It also is helpful for you to mitigate some costly downtime that may be caused to a failure in the vehicle. You may be able to catch a vehicle before the oil runs out, or there's a problem with the vehicle, or an alternator is ready to get not putting out the right voltage. So there's a lot of opportunity really with telematics. You should have defensive driver tests involved, certification processes. Take your people through driver training every couple of years, make sure they're qualified. Make sure you do regular MBR checks, and every one of your drivers has valid driver's licenses. A lot of states allow them to maintain the license even if they're expired or they're revoked. So make sure they're valid. Nothing really makes a company look worse than having drivers that aren't capable or qualified to drive. And then you can establish partnerships with regulatory agencies like DOT, OSHA, CHIP. I know that we established a partnership with CHIP when I was managing a trucking fleet. They would come in and do mock bit inspections for us. They would help us through the paperwork, help us find some of the holes that we had before they actually came in unannounced. So those are things you can do. Just a couple of things to think about. Distracted driving is a leading cause of workplace deaths in the U.S. today. And then certainly driver fatigue, it plays a role in 10 to 15% of the crashes. So as you really focus on these four key pillars, you can strategically create a playbook in your fleet.
Muito bem, pessoal. Estamos finalizando mais um dia de cobertura, hoje também aí com grandes nomes do setor, e amanhã nós estaremos te esperando para o último dia de cobertura. Amanhã vai ser um dia especial, com horários diferentes, então já anota lá para você não perder nada. Começamos como nos últimos dias, às 10 da manhã e depois às 14 horas a gente retorna com os nossos convidados aqui do Brasil para trazer os principais destaques desses 4 dias intensos que foram a cobertura. E quem vai estar lá com a gente é o Sérgio Jabali, daqui da Golsat, o Ricardo Bacelar, da KPMG, e o Milad Neto da Jato. O link para nossa live já está aqui nos comentários, então já deixa aí salvo para você não perder nada, beleza? A gente vai encerrando agora e eu te vejo amanhã. Até logo!